Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to just give everybody a couple of seconds to enter the room here. All right. Good morning and good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. My name is Kelsey. I am the ADU training coordinator for Earth Advantage, and I manage the ADU specialist program that we offer here on the West Coast. Primarily, we've been working on it, and now we're kind of expanding it across the country. Now that we have a lot of statewide legislation being passed in places like Massachusetts. So congratulations to those of you who are in Massachusetts on your new statewide ADU legislation. So this training will be about 2 hours long. We're going to leave some questions for Q&A at the end. We have our presenters, Chris Lee from Backyard ADUs, a builder in Massachusetts. And we also have Kol Peterson with us today, who is a ADU advocate and a legislative consultant for ADUs across the country. So lots of knowledge in the room here today. And I will explain just a little bit about the ADU specialist program. So we, through Earth Advantage, are a real estate school, and we offer trainings for real estate and building, lending, appraising professionals who are interested in all the industries, developers who are interested in the ADU development and ADU advocacy in your local jurisdictions and states. We do offer the opportunity for professionals and educators to become ADU specialists. We have a whole community of ADU specialists across the country and internationally, some in Canada as well, that have taken a course or two of ours that qualify them to become their communities and clients' ADU resource. We have an online directory that lets folks advertise themselves and their companies and their skills as in the ADU realm. So that's something that we'll go over a little bit more at the end, but just wanted to share our program with you a little bit. And from here, I think we have almost everybody here. This is being recorded, so I will send out a link to this at the end later today, once I have it all downloaded, and that way you'll have access to it. And then we will also be posting it on our site so people can see it as well. And for those of you throughout the presentation, we do have the opportunity to ask questions at the end. We'll mostly save questions for the end just so that we can get through the content. So if you have a question that's burning, please put it in the chat or the Q&A section. And yes, so I do have a Q&A section live, so if you want to use that or the chat, I'll be monitoring both. If it's super pertinent to the conversation that's happening, then I will go ahead and stop the presenters, but otherwise I think we'll save most of them to the end to just kind of rush through them at the end and give them a little bit more attention. And I think that that's it for me for now. You're free to use the video if you'd like to use the video. We also want to use this as an opportunity to network a little bit. So if you want to put who you are and what you do and where you're from in the chat, just to have a little bit of networking, feel free to do that. We're always looking to build community and networks within the ADU space. So, all right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Kol and Chris.
Thank you, Kelsey. All right, so I'm going to start, and I'll be sharing my screen in a second. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Kol Peterson. I live in Portland, Oregon, and it is not raining today for the first time in a little bit, which is great. I'm originally from Massachusetts, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit in the context of this presentation. But the bulk of the presentation today is going to be done by Chris Lee, who is a practitioner in New England, in Mass. But I'm going to give some context about the ADU movement at large and what's been happening with ADUs and statewide legislation in other states. All right. So let's make sure this all works. Okay. All right. So we're here today to discuss the new law in Massachusetts. And it's going to be me and Chris. And as Kelsey mentioned, we're going to have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So um, uh, that'll be both an opportunity for you all to ask questions and also for me to ask questions of Chris. This is where I grew up. I grew up in Newton, Mass. Lovely, lovely house. And while we grew up there near BC Law School, we had an attic apartment that we rented out to BC Law School students. I went to the Graduate School of Design at Harvard, studied environmental planning and design, and learned about smart growth and different urban infill strategies at that point. I moved, um, Kelsey, could you just mute whoever might be making noise? Um, I moved to Washington, D.C. after grad school and lived in this federal townhouse style building. At which point taking a clue from our attic apartment in Newton, Mass, I built a basement unit and rented it out and was cash flowing as I was living in this unit, which helped me to, have it was kind of my first intro into what subsequently became my interest in ADUs. But this was basically just like had housemates that were paying for my mortgage and they were getting a cheap rent, and one of those housemates had essentially their own unit. Um, but it wasn't really till I got to Portland and I started to actually build a permanent ADU in 2010 that I really got knowledgeable about ADUs. And that was largely because Portland had really good ADU codes starting in 2010. In 2010, we had no owner occupancy requirements, no off-street parking requirements. You could build them by right. They could be detached. And this was at the time, there was literally like very few places in the country where you could do those, where there was no prohibitions on ADUs. And so I built that ADU in 2010, detached ADU on a property that I purchased, moved into the detached ADU, started renting out the front house, and my life was utterly different after that point because for the rest of my life, I had no living expenses. I had no housing expenses. My entire housing cost was being paid for by the rental income on the primary house. And I was living in this gorgeous detached ADU in the backyard that I did custom design and built. And I was just like, this is amazing. I started teaching classes for other homeowners in Portland about it. And so fast forward, the ADU movement kind of blew up in Portland starting in 2010. We went through this exponential growth curve that I'll refer to later. Um, and um, and it's kind of it's been a big part of my life ever since. In sometime in the late 20 teens, an author, Amy Dane, wrote a report, State of Accessory Dwelling Units in Massachusetts. And it was in reading this report that I realized how different the standards were in the East Coast largely. But Massachusetts was the place where I actually had the data to look at the state of the regulations in great detail based on this report, and I couldn't believe what I saw. It is so restrictive in Mass, with a place where I'd grown up and had an illegal attic unit. But, had we known what ADUs were and had we known what the standards were for building ADUs, there's absolutely no way we could have built a permanent ADU at that point. The standards in Newton and the standards throughout a lot of Massachusetts were just incredibly onerous. Same thing went for Washington, D.C. There's no way I could have built permanent ADU in Washington, D.C. under those rules. I had to build it as an unpermitted, informal unit because the rules were so restrictive. And this is true throughout was true throughout every city in Mass, and frankly, throughout the entire East Coast. the rules for ADUs are very onerous relative to what they are now on the West Coast, and we'll get more into that in a second. So I started the website called accessorydwellings.org. Most recently, I posted about the Massachusetts ADU law. And so you can check that out if you're interested. This gets into some of the detailed information regarding setback requirements and lot coverage that we might touch on a little bit today. Um, but I'm going to just broadly cover here what are the key legislative changes that, as a prerequisite for an ADU movement to occur, must be in place. And these can occur at the local level, and they can also occur at the state level. So these are simply the zoning prerequisites. This doesn't get into a lot of other stuff that Chris will get into, but I just want to give some overview and context for the baseline standard of what is required to get ADUs to actually be a viable form of housing. Number one, you have to drop owner occupancy requirements. Massachusetts bill does this, but just in short, most jurisdictions on the East Coast require that if you build an ADU, you have to live on the property indefinitely. And this has a whole suite of different ramifications, not the least of which is banks won't necessarily readily finance on properties that where there's a deed restriction that they have to owner occupy it. Should the owner default, how can a bank owner occupy that property if it's lending to you? But it also greatly hinders your ability to use that property for any number of purposes, and eliminates the flexibility that people like to have. So it's very problematic. Off-street parking requirements. If you build an ADU, you have to build an additional off-street parking spot. That rule is fairly dominant throughout the United States. And if you have that rule in effect, you cannot generally build an ADU because the geometry of that site won't allow for it. That is to say, there isn't going to be sufficient space to build an additional off-street parking spot. And not to mention it's quite expensive, 10 to say $15,000 to build an off-street parking spot if you had the space to do it, which would drive up the cost of housing. So you're essentially, making a trade-off to say, like, my community values off-street parking for my, like, habitat for my vehicle more than habitat for human beings. If there's a conditional use process in effect, that is to say, if you need to get neighbors' permission to build a structure, we generally, as human beings, don't like to have more people near us. And if you give neighbors the aptitude to shoot down a housing development project next door to them, they're going to shoot it down. So generally speaking, you have to make these things by right. That is to say, if you go into your municipal office and you apply for a permit, you shall be able to build it by right without getting your neighbor's consent or the city council's consent. The structural forms of ADUs, we have to allow for all different structural forms of ADUs. Among the other poison pills that were in Massachusetts standards, it only allowed for internal conversions of portions of the house. So you couldn't build a detached ADU. But in practice, a lot of people don't want to alter their primary house and need the 3 bedrooms that they have for their family, but they have a backyard. So let's let them use that backyard. But also allowing people to convert a garage that was ostensibly used for parking a vehicle into an ADU is really important because that is the least expensive form of housing unit you can build in this country in general. So allowing for garage conversions and detached ADUs and internal conversions and attached ADUs and different style attic conversions, basement conversions, all those are important. We have to allow for ADUs on any lot size. We don't want to just say, oh, you can only build an ADU on a lot that's 20,000 square feet, which is incidentally what Rhode Island requires. And then requiring allowing for ADUs to be very close to the property line, 5 feet from the property line, is important because if you have a small urban infill lot that's 5,000 square feet, if you have a normal sized backyard and you have a 20-foot setback on the rear or side yard, you won't be able to fit an object in the backyard because of that setback requirement. Unfortunately, Massachusetts does not address that prohibition or that standard in its statewide law. The things here that I've bolded are the things that Massachusetts statewide law does address. The things that are not bolded are the things that Massachusetts statewide law does not address. Height limits. So we have to allow for two-story ADUs. If you have a small backyard and you wanted to be able to put a 900 square foot detached ADU, you have to be able to allow, you have to be able to be able to put in a two-story building, um, because otherwise you can't really fit geometrically to enough square footage to make that a viable project that will pencil. And lastly, there has to be fairly low administrative fees and utility costs associated with the development. Chris will probably touch more on this, but a lot of jurisdictions have very exorbitant impact fees that are proportional or directly equivalent to what they would be for a single family house. And that is not fair when you're talking about building a small building that's going to have relatively low impact. Those impact fees should be proportional to the size of the impact, and they are not in the case of ADUs in many cases. So if we look at what statewide reforms or local reforms that address all these issues can do, what will happen and what has happened in areas that have a housing crisis, that is to say, where land values are expensive and there's a need for housing, is we will see an exponential growth curve of ADUs. This is what happened in 2010 when Portland reduced its regulatory barriers for ADUs. The number of ADUs started shooting up and it doubled each year till 2018. And we got up to about 660 in 2018, and then it tabled off and then it dropped down. So since that time, it's dropped down to the underlying maybe demand rate for the construction of ADUs, but there was a lot of pent up demand for people to actually be able to legally build these things. And so we saw an explosive growth curve in the period of time following the years that those barriers were knocked out of the way. And that same exact thing has held true in Seattle, Washington. When all the ADU reforms went into effect in 2019, we saw a kind of an exponential spike that is going up to this day. So that's been really interesting to watch. And then in California, they were the first state to pass kind of strong legislative reform at the state level, and they have also experienced an exponential growth curve of ADUs from that time in 2017 to 2023. So they kind of are California led the way in terms of showing that statewide legislative reform has the most promise to reduce these policy barriers at a statewide level, because states actually do have the power and authority to prescribe what types of zoning reforms can be in effect in their state. They granted zoning authority to local jurisdictions back in the 20s, the State Zone Enabling Act, but that was a power that they granted to the local jurisdictions, and they can take it away. And at this point, what's happening is states are realizing that jurisdictions are essentially incapable of eliminating these regulatory barriers because of the politics of reducing them. It's very difficult politically to reduce the regulatory barriers at the municipal level, and so states have started following California's lead, and now we have a number of states that are emulating what California has done. So all these rules need to be fixed to enable ADUs to flourish as a base standard. Politically, statewide preemption of local zoning is the only way to get these rules changed expediently. Massachusetts is the 7th state to adopt strong preemptive ADU zoning reforms. This has already happened in California and Oregon, but this year alone, notably, the following states have adopted or have strong ADU reforms that are going into effect: Colorado, Arizona, Montana, Washington, and Massachusetts. So it's going to be, this is a really big year for ADUs at the statewide level, not because these rules passed this year, but because they're going into effect this year. But just as a counterpoint to that, I will note that there's a whole lot of states that have passed ADU reforms that I would call weak or ineffective, such as New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Maine. And these are, we can go into the details of why I think these are weak, but based on the standards that I went through in the prerequisites slide, these states do not meet that prerequisite, whereas Mass does meet that prerequisite set of standards. Um, I'm going to, this is the act that was passed in Massachusetts. It's very brief, which is actually a good thing. It's not like hundreds of pages long. It's literally just 2 paragraphs long. You can read it. It's Section 8 of the Homes Act, and this is the URL for it. And Chris will go into a little bit more detail about what this law says specifically. Um, but at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Chris to go into more detail about his experience designing and building ADUs in Massachusetts and throughout New England. And I've asked Chris to do this because not because he's necessarily a policy wonk, but because he's actually doing it in these different states around New England, and he has been doing it for a while. And there's no better way to kind of understand what the barriers and opportunities are for ADUs than to talk to somebody who's successfully been deploying ADUs in New England up to this point. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Chris. Here we go.
Well, thanks, Cole. Thank you for the invite to join you on this. It was definitely humbling getting the email and the request. I think you're definitely right. I wouldn't consider myself a policy wonk anymore, but I think in the first couple of years of ADUs in Mass, it was kind of necessary navigating all kinds of crazy blood rental rules and same shared wall nonsense, which luckily we're kind of getting out of the woods on that with that strong state level ADU rules. So I'm going to share my screen and go over what we're going to go through today. Everyone see my screen? Is that?
Yes.
We can see it. Yeah, you guys will go to presenter mode. I think it'll be good.
Joe. All right, there we go. So for those that I have not met or anyone new to backyard ADUs, my name is Chris Lee. I'm the original founder of Backyard ADUs, and I got started in the ADU space in East Hampton, Massachusetts, back in the fall of 2019. Definitely before ADUs were sexy in Massachusetts, and the path to figuring it out was kind of similar to what Cole had kind of described. Is luckily I was living in an area that had a couple of towns that were progressive on housing policy. They had already made some changes, and specifically in the Pioneer Valley up in Massachusetts, the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission had been working a little bit with the Cape Cod Commission, and there were several towns that had already started to make ADUs a little bit more permissible. East Hampton wasn't actually one of those towns, but we were able to get one permitted anyway, by basically explaining that what we were going to do was good for the community and good for the person we were going to build it. And after we built it, I think it was a year and a half, 2 years later, they ended up updating their zoning bylaw, and it's kind of been a trend that we've been seeing, and it's been exciting kind of following that over the last 5 years. What I want to look at today, in over the next hour, is really quickly ADUs in general. I think Cole covered some of that. We're not going to spend a lot of time in there. I'm going to talk I'm going to talk a little bit about the new law, but we're going to spend a lot of time looking at what are still ADU deal breakers. Because while we have a permissive statewide law now, there's a lot of stuff in Mass that are going to make ADU projects difficult and things you're going to want to get ahead of when you get into it. The other big one that's applicable in New England, energy code and building small. That's going to be something that's going to throw a lot of people for a loop, especially a lot of traditional builders and doing it for the first time, trying to hit HERS ratings on a small 600 square foot house. And then we're going to talk about budgets, because if you can't pay for it, you can't build it. I talked a little bit about how we got started with backyard ADUs, but very specifically backyard ADUs today. We're based out of Brunswick, Maine. We got started in East Hampton, but I brought the business back to Maine when my wife started working as a pediatrician up in Augusta. And we retained our core team in Massachusetts. We started building a team in Maine when Maine did LD 2003, which was their ADU bylaw. And today we've got 36 people. It's a mix of carpenters and project managers and designers. Everyone needed to get this stuff done. Today we're building just over an ADU a week in Maine and Massachusetts. By the end of this year, we're hoping to be able to do 2 ADUs a week in order to keep up with the demand that is in Massachusetts and try to help the governor hit her 10,000 ADUs, which we reckon is going to be a steep hill to climb. Everything that we build is built off-site, so we're a modular designer and modular builder. And that also kind of gives us a bias towards building new detached ADUs. But I'll talk a little bit about what we know about space conversions and attached, because it's all applicable to ADUs and in building more housing units. So what's an ADU? It stands for Accessory Dwelling Unit. I always kind of like to say it's a loophole to single family zoning. It's a way of eliminating single family zoning without saying that you actually did. And in the early days, we kind of called it I was jokingly calling it's a deal with the devil, where the towns can just get this done and now you can build a 2-family next to your single family neighbor. But at the end of the day, all these are, it's a little standalone house, generally under 900 square feet. It could be a conversion of an attic or a basement, or it could be something that's attached. But it's just a gentle increase in density in a single family neighborhood. And they're great. And they've been around forever. It's not new in Massachusetts. Massachusetts used to call them accessory apartments. That was a pretty common term throughout zoning bylaws. But you see people throw around the in-law apartment above the garage, granny flats, coach houses, which I think is a fancy Newton term for converting your garage. So there's lots of different things that people refer to them. In terms of form, as I mentioned, we do a lot of these detached ones, and that's a function of kind of when we got started with it. It was easier to build a business around building detached because it's very easy to plan. But there are a lot of attached ADUs that get built. Some of these attached ADUs could be adding 100 square feet and also converting 200 square feet. We've done that before. You can see conversions of attics. You can see conversions of garages. You can be above a garage. You can do basements. It's basically just turning anything on your property into something with a stove, a fridge, a bathroom, and a sleeping area. And that's basically what it is. And in Massachusetts, these are all allowed now. As long as you can design something that meets building code, you're going to be able to do it. And each one of these have different challenges depending on the situation and a lot. Like detached, it's going to be really hard to do detached in, say, Jamaica Plain. But I bet in Jamaica Plain, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to do space conversions. So it's kind of like pick your form depending on what your property is and where you're trying to build it. So look at a few pictures here. This is an ADU we built 3 years ago in Abington. The goal was keep the budget down and get this built. It was actually the resident living in here was the oldest person we ever moved into an ADU. She was 94. But she moved in, she's living in here. The existing house is occupied by her son and his family. But it was a quasi-attached ADU. In Abington, they let us get away with doing this funny little roof as the attached detail, which wasn't always the case. Luckily, we don't need to worry about doing these fake attachments anymore in Massachusetts. You can just build it and make it work for the lot. It also had a neat shared deck to use the above ground pool that they had. This is a detached ADU, fully detached. This one's out in the backyard. It's got windows looking out over the rear yard. And again, this is a family ADU. So the privacy aspect of this wasn't a concern to this homeowner. And this is one that we built down in Forestdale, Sandwich, Massachusetts. And this too is now allowed in mass with the new law. This is 1,000 square feet. So this would have to be by some towns may allow this by right. Some towns might actually allow you to do this with a special permit. And I don't think Sandwich actually updated their rules. They have a funny bylaw for determining how big something is, where they exclude various aspects of the living area. I don't think it's purposely confusing, but it sure is. And it took a little while to figure out how big this one was in the eyes of the town. So Cole was kind of talking about the explosion of ADUs and showed some of the graphs on the West Coast. That hasn't happened here yet, but interest is starting to explode. So I was like I say, we're about 5 years behind California and Portland and what has happened out there. And I always kind of double check the Google search trends data, basically people searching for ADU in Massachusetts. And you can see that it's just been kind of a steady, slow increase. And then all of a sudden, mass tried to pass the Affordable Homes Act, and interest has just exploded. So there are tons and tons of people in Massachusetts that want to do this, and they're trying to find a way to do it. And from a backyard ADU standpoint, this equates to 500 to 600 unique people filling out a form on our website asking for more information about how to build an ADU. So the scale is pretty large, and if we get some stuff right, I think it's possible to fulfill some of the numbers that the administration is looking for. So who are these ADUs getting built for? Who's living in them? I think that's a question that always comes up, and the best data that we have again comes from the West Coast. About a quarter of them are rented out. And then there's lots of kind of subline ways of what people are doing. Some people are living in them. Some people have sold them as condos. Some are doing short-term rentals. There's a huge list of what people are doing with them. And that is also kind of an ADU as a thing is about giving somebody flexibility on how they use their property and how they make it work for them. And a lot of that ends up in creating housing. I think one of the key things that might be getting overlooked when we start looking at newly constructed ADUs in Massachusetts, especially until we allow condoization and resale of these, is that most newly constructed ADUs are being used to house family. We've built 70 so far. 69 of them are for family. And we get people calling us asking if they can do rental units, but unfortunately, they just don't pencil out, even at the high rents in Massachusetts. It's just the cost of construction today, combined with with interest, makes it very difficult for this to be a for-profit investment. And there's things that are currently being discussed at the state level in order to try to help offset that with some low interest rate funding. And I don't have any real details on that, just kind of a little birdie told me. But we're fingers crossed that that's going to happen and allow more of these to be true affordable rental units. So the Affordable Homes Act has passed. So that's the legislation that included the ADU rules and made these basically forced municipalities to update their zoning bylaws to allow ADUs of all kinds. It's okay for municipalities to still add some requirements to building an ADU. And that was basically part of the negotiation that the administration had in order to get this passed and be the first state or second state in New England to pass a very permissive ADU rule. I say that the second, I believe the first was Vermont many years ago, but Vermont also doesn't have universally enforced building code at the municipal level, so that was a lot easier to do. But yeah, municipalities had until February of this year to get their zoning bylaws updated and get in line. And for the most part, from what we heard, most municipalities were excited about it. They were excited that somebody took the lead to say what they needed to do, and many got in front of it. We did have some examples of municipalities say that they weren't going to update their bylaws and let someone try to take an ADU through a 40B or 40A process to get permitted. Um, but they've changed their heart, and we actually have ADUs in our pipeline now that are going to get permitted by those towns even before they update their zoning bylaws. So it's all positive, and towns, for the most part, and more than on average, are embracing this. Oh, where did this go? Oh, so what can they not require? So they can't require owner occupancy anymore. That's off the table. That is a big move for allowing home values to be properly assessed, and if there is going to be additional investment money coming in to help fund some of these. They can't require special permitting for the base level ADU. Um, and this is a really big deal because special permits open the door to lawsuits easily. They open the doors to neighbor comments. They make it very difficult to plan to build an ADU as a builder because you just never know when it's going to be ready to break ground and when to put it on your schedule. And they can't require more than one parking space for ADUs located within basically public transit. So this isn't a blanket. Parking isn't allowed in Massachusetts, but it's targeting those places that technically shouldn't require an extra spot. And then any parking for an ADU located within half a mile from a commuter. So any parking, sorry, I did those a little bit reversed here. So they can't, universally, they can't have more than one parking spot. And then municipalities can't require parking at all if it's right on top of a commuter station, which is very good for some of the tighter areas of Boston where it would be a deal breaker for a lot of spaces to be able to add an ADU, then also add parking. So what can communities do in ADUs in single family zoning districts? So this is an interesting piece here. So the legislation says they can impose reasonable restrictions. And they did lift some of those reasonable restrictions, but they also left it a little bit vague. So they can allow a site plan review. That's not a full-on special permit or zoning board, planning board review. It has a lower barrier for approval, so it makes it easier for all of the people on the planning board to say yes. But it is still public. It is still allowing neighbors to come in and comment, but theoretically, it's not going to overturn an ADU or really upset a process. Title V requirements, this is a big one outside of areas accessed by sewer. So the full Title V legislation passed in '96 is still fully in force for building ADUs. Dimensional setbacks, coverage ratios, floor area ratios, height maximums, that's all still in play. So whatever a zoning district says about how far you have to be from your property line, that's still going to apply to ADUs. We do see some towns that have differing or lower setbacks for detached and attached ADUs. Worcester's one of them. Worcester's got a lower one. East Hampton's another one. And again, there's a lot of towns that are really embracing this and trying to make it easier. And then they can do restriction on short-term rentals. And this, I think, was a big one, especially getting areas like Cape Cod on board with allowing this. Short-term rentals, there is good data that shows a lot of these do get filled up with short-term rentals in vacation towns. But on the other side of that, there's a lot of interesting ideas around, and Portland, Maine just updated their rules where they're actually going to encourage people to build ADUs, rent them for short term for a period of time. And in Portland, it's 5 years. And that amount of time is enough to pay for the ADU. and then someone can own it outright, and then they can rent it affordably. So basically letting vacationers finance the construction of ADUs that ultimately become rental units. So ZBA special permit versus site plan review. I touched on this very quickly. So under new rules, ADUs are not going to be going through the ZBA, the Zoning Board of Appeals, for special permits, unless it has some unique aspect that is actually not in compliance with the zoning bylaw. But the site plan review is directly to the planning board. It's got a lower level of criteria to get approved. And for all intents and purposes, it's kind of like a staff level review with a rubber stamp from the planning board. And it's much more predictable in terms of how much time it adds to the planning process and when you're actually going to get it built, which is a plus to builders and everyone involved in your ADU project team. So if we can't do special permits, what's the permitting route for these? So in Massachusetts, a lot of the kind of the lingo is by right, or a by right permit, which means you can just do this, and it's up to the building commissioner to determine whether or not you're in compliance with the zoning bylaw and building code. And in the zoning bylaw, it's going to be listed as a permitted use in the zoning district. So it just means, yes, you can do this. You can have a single family home. You can have an accessory dwelling unit. You could also have a home occupation. So it's now in that realm. And the key here, generally easier and faster. It's a predictable timeline for most municipalities. And it's not going to go out to public comment. It's just going to stay inside the department. One on some sides of this, and this is kind of disappearing, it does put a lot of power into the building commissioner for interpreting the zoning bylaw, especially if the ADU section has ambiguous requirements. And we have seen this work in both ways. A building commissioner who likes ADUs, who interprets things loosely or liberally, and a building commissioner that can interpret stuff in the other direction. That's something that I think is important when you're going to do this permitting, even in the presence of the new bylaw, is understanding how that may play for or against you in your ADU process and knowing that up front. And that's whoever's going to be helping you with permitting, whether it's an architect or a civil engineer or your builder or your designer. They should have a sense of that and try to get a sense of that up front. Because at the end of the day, you take the power out of a multi-head board, but you put it in the position of potentially one person who, in Massachusetts, especially small towns, it has a lot to do with relationships and being friendly and not necessarily consistent interpretation of a zoning bylaw. So additional permitting, and we're going to touch on this in more detail. Can't do special permits, but there's lots of other ways that towns in Massachusetts get you in front of a board. And big ones, conservation. If you're in a conservation overlay, you're going in front of the Conservation Commission, and it is going to slow down your project considerably. Historic's another one. Historic's going to force you to change siding materials, have different architectural details. This is going to come up and it's going to continue to be there. And then other overlays that are out there. There's lots of diverse types of these throughout Massachusetts. Cape Cod has a lot of them. Cape Cod has a lot of different conservation adjacent overlays to watch out for. That's where we've seen it most. I've got a picture here. I think the most difficult permitting experience that we've had in the history of backyard ADUs is in Lexington, Massachusetts. This is a picture. If this is a lot in Lexington, if you were to drive by it, you would see green grass, a single family home, residential street, curated gardens, but you're also looking at a conservation overlay area. And it was a surprise to us, but we ended up spending $25,000 installing subsurface leaching facilities, and we had to do supervised installation of erosion control to make sure that we weren't eroding material across the mowed lawn into the wetland setbacks. We had another one of these in Lexington. We started permitting it back in, oh my gosh, I think it was October, maybe even before that. I think we started working actually on August and submitted, but we're finally going to set that house in May. So it almost took 10 months to weave our way through all of the things required for the town of Lexington. And again, I said Lexington is actually embracing ADUs, but their conservation department is really trying to protect wetlands. So it's kind of at odds. It's not that the conservation department doesn't want housing. It just wants to make sure that the wetlands are protected. And that's kind of what we're seeing with some of these other pieces is they can get in there and kind of slow these processes down, ultimately for a good cause, but ultimately making it very difficult to build something. All right. I'm going to move into what we call the 5 deal breakers, and we're going to kind of zoom in on some of the very specific things that as you're planning an ADU project in Mass, you should be kind of checking off and making sure you're allocating time to before you waste too much time or money on your project. And ultimately, and these are all still allowed and are different in every municipality. So the first one is water. You've got to figure out how you're going to get water to your ADU. And we call this a planning complexity of it's medium. It's not easy. It's not hard, but it's going to take you some time to figure this out. You're going to need a well driller or possible involvement of the DPW, depending on if you're well or public. You're going to need an excavator involved to help understand if you're going to need to replace water lines. And this could apply even if you're doing space conversion. And then you're going to need a plumber involved because they're responsible for water lines within 10 feet of the foundation. You might also need a well filtration company if you're on a well, so that you could have 4 different heads involved in this. And this could add $25,000 to a project pretty easily if you're going to need to do a new well or a new filtration system or going into the street. So how are you evaluating this? So there's 2 different paths for figuring out your water. And I'm not going to go super detailed in this, but you can kind of take these as the questions you should be asking. If you're on a public water supply, you're basically looking for your service pipe and just figuring out how big is it and what is the material. And different towns have different requirements for material. The diameter size is a plumbing code thing. Is it going to provide enough water? But material is sometimes a town by town requirement with a DPW. You're going to be looking at the meter size. Apologize for that typo. And generally, if you're adding an ADU, you're going to want a 3/4 inch meter. And most single family homes only have a 5-inch meter. So it's a relatively easy upgrade that you're going to add to your ADU project. And then you're going to be looking at distance to the public connection. As water travels through a pipe over a long distance, friction reduces the pressure and the flow rate. So if you're trying to build an ADU 200 feet out behind your single family house in Western Massachusetts, you're probably going to have an expensive water connection. Wells are similar. There's specific ways that you figure out if you're going to have enough water. You're really looking for refill rate. That's the number one thing. How quickly is the water in your well getting replenished as it's drawn down? And that's something a well company could help you measure. You're looking for how big is your well pump? How quickly can you pump water out of it to feed the ADU in your house? And then water quality is the other one. Is the water drinkable? Does it need a filtration system? Does it have heavy metals in it? And if you're already using your well, you are very likely to already know that. Okay, number 2, Septic and sewer. So this is the second utility to check out, and I'd say this is a complex thing to figure out. And I'll kind of take it's complex if you're on septic. It's not that complex if you are on city sewer. That tends to be easier. And I'll start, but if you are on septic, you're going to need a septic engineer involved. You're going to need a builder involved. You're going to need the excavator involved. You're going to need a town official involved because most towns require supervised percolation tests. And then you may also need a civil engineer involved if they're going to require an additional level of analysis on the lot. And you may also need a surveyor to evaluate setbacks. So this can get complicated in a hurry. This can be a lot of people getting paid to talk to each other to try to figure this out before you actually have a design. And these systems can get expensive. If you're doing a full new septic system that has low nitrogen reduction capability, you could easily spend $45,000 on that. On the other side of this, and I probably should have put some details on here, but a city sewer connection, it's a lot easier. You're pretty much just trying to figure out if you have a pipe that's in reasonable condition that's at least 4 inches and whether or not you can gravity feed to it or you need a septic pump. And in those situations, your budget swings are much, much lower. You're generally not going to see a budget increase more than 15,000, and that would be if you need a new public connection in the road and you also need a pump to pump sewer out of your yard. So a little bit about evaluating your septic. So septic capacity is determined by bedroom count. A septic system is rated to handle a certain number of bedrooms. And houses have numbers of bedrooms, and bedrooms are defined by whether or not it has a closet and a closable door, essentially, by most municipalities. You're also looking to see if you have low nitrogen requirements. This is taking off in the Cape. Wellfleet just created new rules that require all new septic systems to be low nitrogen, which is a huge cost. Grades, are you pumping up to the system or can you gravity feed? This can have a big cost implication. And then your percolation of the ground and how high is your groundwater. Those are basically the things that are going to drive the cost of your septic system. And then public, I touched on these. Grades, condition of the pipe, and then if the DPW has any odd requirements, which I'll call it in the bougie towns around Boston, Concord, Lexington, Newton. These towns, DPWs, are all starting to take positions on how to connect the sewer pipe and the water pipe. And they can have differing levels of implications depending on how you are planning to get water and sewer to the ADU. Just to show how ridiculous this can get. So Title V septic, so this is in rural Newbury, no conservation overlays. This giant trench is for a 1-bedroom ADU. All of this material was excavated, removed from the site, and this hole is going to get backfilled with special Title V sand, just to make sure that flushing of the toilet and the showers of one person ends up in the ground appropriately. And I just call common sense, please. Like, this is completely unnecessary. I don't like, and I would say most septic engineers would agree. But this was done because of soil requirements and virgin fill and the literal interpretation of how Title V works. And this was a huge surprise for us. And we were hoping to do a single moderate leaching trench expansion for this for less than 15,000. After we did this, and then after we put in this special fancy poop grinding septic pump that the health board wanted for this town, we got into it for almost 30 grand for 1 bedroom. It was insane. It was completely insane. But this was unique, to be clear. But this is the kind of thing that you're trying to get ahead of when you're early in your planning process. Because if you are on a budget, like most of us are on a budget, 30 grand's a lot of money, and you want to know about that before you start doing paid design work.
Chris, can I ask you a question, make a comment? Yeah, I mean, one of the things that observations is that ADUs are not generally built by super wealthy people. They're generally built by people who really need this unit as an additional housing unit. So it's a cost sensitive type of architecture inherently based on the user who's developing it. So it's all these like death by a thousand paper cut issues that you're going over that make ADUs difficult, even in the face of good ADU laws. But specifically with regard to tying into public sewer, um, I don't think the Massachusetts law explicitly states that you can tie into existing sewer from the primary house. Have you come across any situations where the city is requiring a dedicated sewer connection, which would be a bad thing, to the municipal service, or are all jurisdictions allowing you to tie into the existing lateral that comes into the primary house?
It's both. Some are requiring fully separate. Concord is leading the way in unique DPW drawings for both water and sewer connections. And when the administration, when they released their rules around this in terms of what is reasonable, they didn't quite get the wording right, unfortunately, but they said no part of the municipality can impose regulations or restrictions on sewer or water connections. However, it didn't bar DPWs from doing so, which are not technically the municipality. So they can do it. They are doing it. And we're doing best to be loud about it. And Concord has actual drawings that show the most common one is not requiring sewer connections in the basement of the existing house. And from what we've heard, the justification is what happens if it backs up? Then the ADU doesn't have sewer service. And we say, well, go knock on the door. It's your neighbor and work on it. But you can think of a situation where if you can't go all the way around the house because the setbacks are too small, now you're in a situation where you just can't get sewage out, or you're turning a 10-foot sewer run into a 100-foot sewer run. And then so that you municipalities are getting unfortunately creative in their rules around this, and it's causing excessive costs for a lot of people. All right. How am I doing? Doing okay on time. So the third one of these, it's the third utility, power. How do you get electricity to this? This is luckily the easiest one to figure out. And generally, you just need the utility company and the electrician. Sometimes you might need an excavator if you're going to need someone to dig for underground power. But you can generally trust the electrician and the utility company to tell you what you should do. And most often with an ADU, it's just as easy to add a new meter to feed this new unit. It gets a little bit more complicated if you're doing space conversion and trying to come off of an existing panel. But even if you do that, electricians, master electricians, I think of all of the trades tend to be on the ball and know what they're talking about. Budget impacts, generally speaking, adding the new meter, it's going to be a relatively small line item. You're going to be into it for less than 4,000. But if you're again, like if you're trying to put this 200 feet back in the woods and you're trying to get power out there, that's when this is going to get expensive in a hurry. Long underground power runs adds up exponentially with electrical. And it's the same situation with water. The further your electrical run goes, the bigger your wire size has to be. So it jumps up in cost very quickly. And then evaluating your electric service, again, an electrician utility company is going to be able to help you with this pretty consistently. But you're looking at your current service size, you're looking at your current service utilization. So could you go off your existing panel if you wanted to? How far are you from the public connection point? And then what are your ADU power needs? If you're doing an all electric ADU, you're generally going to be trying to get 200 amps to it to power your mini split, your water heater, your electric stove, and all of that. If you're doing an addition, or a space conversion, you might not need that much power. You may be extending your existing gas boiler, um, and you may need lower power consumption. If you're underground, it does add a level of complications, mainly because you can't see it and you can't just look up the power lines and see what's going on. So it could take a little bit longer. And generally, if you have underground power, you can expect it to increase your budget by at least 5 grand for your electrical portion if you're upgrading the service. Um, Other thing to keep in mind for electric services, I wouldn't say a lot of towns, some towns in Massachusetts are starting to require all electric in new units. I know Northampton does this. I think Brookline does this. Cambridge may be trying to do this, but there's a lot of towns that are moving towards this all electric movement. And in that situation, you can generally assume you're going to need to upgrade your power to build your ADU.
Chris, quick question on that power. I didn't see anything mentioned about solar. I mean, do you ever have that option where maybe the main house can perhaps add a solar unit to then deviate to an ADU, or that the ADU is also utilizing that as well? I'm just curious about that because you did stipulate all power, but is that to eliminate the solar option?
Nope. So in solar in Massachusetts, if you're grid tied, you're going to basically feed that solar back to 1 meter and then rank properties that you want it to offset. So you'll say offset my main house first, and then offset my ADU meter second, and it's net metering. If you're off grid, we haven't done anything off grid, but you could theoretically do that. But
Off-grid means that you invest in your own system, and that is what you mean by that, right?
yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm
Um,
not an architect and I'm not a builder, but I'm very interested in all this. I've been following it for years, and so and I live in New York.
okay.
So a conversation for later. Um, but I have a unit on the property. I have a hen house that I want to create, a chicken house that I want to turn into something because it's illegal to have chickens, but I'd like to be able to utilize it. And so I'm just trying to figure out my way around here and then the politics that we have. And I'm just trying to feel my way right now. So that's why I'm here.
Well, can't have chickens, but maybe you can have a new neighbor.
Yeah, or guests.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely encourage solar. I mean, with gas prices all over the place, electrical prices all over the place, maybe 25% on Canadian hydro. Um, Once you put panels in your house, you've locked in your rate. So it's becoming a no-brainer.
Thank you.
So zoning, because of the zoning is like the next one you need to look at. Because of the new statewide law, you're generally not going to have a zoning block, and theoretically, the zoning question should be pretty easy. You can build an ADU of any kind, 50% of your floor area or 900 square feet, whichever. Like you can do that, and it's a pretty easy conversation with the town planner or the building commissioner to get clarification on what are your setbacks and are there any other weird things to keep in mind. And generally, you only need the municipality and the owner. Municipalities are there for you. The planners are there for you. The commissioners are there for you. And as long as they're not too busy, they should be helpful. And you should be able to rely on them. You shouldn't have to have an intermediary between you and them, especially in the early stages when you're just trying to get some information. That said, you can bring in a designer or a surveyor or like one of these other professionals to help with that conversation, but you don't necessarily need to. And now that towns can't have crazy attachment rules or various design rules, the zoning is not going to have a huge budgetary impact. It may have setback related impacts about where you can put it. But from we've seen in the feasibility studies that we do and the properties we've evaluated, setbacks are impacting properties that are in the dense areas that are trying to add space. But a lot of the rural suburban properties is generally a way to make something work with the setbacks that are in place and larger lot sizes. So quickly evaluating your zoning. There's a small checklist here to look at. Max size, that's going to be your first stop. Can you build what you need to build for your expected use? Setbacks, where do you need to be? Can you actually put it where you want to put it? If you replace your non-conforming garage, can you add a half story to that? Is there a path for that? Max coverage. All municipalities regulate how much of your grass you can cover with buildings or impervious space. We don't often see this one being a blocker for adding even new detached ADUs, but it could. You could be up against max impervious spaces. We see this consistently in South Portland, Maine, but that's the only municipality we have problems with it on. And of course, if you're converting space, this is a non-issue. And then overlays are the last one to really check into. Double check that you don't have some overlay that's adding an additional set of rules to your project. Like in Harwich, the Six Ponds overlay, which caught us up and killed a project for us back in 2021 down in Harwich. And it was a wake-up call on overlays for us on how detailed they can be, and they can pretty much overrule an entire zoning bylaw and rewrite it. All right. So energy efficiency and small. I'm going to kind of zip through this and talk about it mostly as it applies to small homes. So let's take a peek at an actual HERS projection. So in Massachusetts, all new additions, all ADUs, all new buildings need to be basically energy modeled with an independent modeler. And what they do, kind of the primary idea of this report, is it's going to give you a number between 0 and 100. And it's basically saying, how much more efficient are you than the average house? This house got a 39. And the normal house is 100, so it's way in that front end of the scale. Massachusetts has the Mass Save rebate program, and to kind of add a reference point, in order to qualify for a $15,000 rebate from Mass Save, you need to be less than 45. So 45 is kind of a cutoff when they created this program as something that they see as very, very efficient. It also talks about how much less money is this house going to cost to run compared to that average. And it breaks down the loads. Where is the annual cost going? Now, with a small house, you get in this weird situation where your heating and cooling are only a third of your total use. And this kind of turns your energy efficiency strategy on its head. It creates a situation where you may not be putting triple pane windows in this ADU in order to make it more efficient in the winter. You might do that just because you want to put triple pane windows in it, or because you don't like a cold spot in your house at all. But it turns your attention to, okay, when I'm planning my ADU, look at these lights and appliances. Maybe I should be doing a center controlled light panel so my lights don't get left on accidentally, because those are a huge driver in cost. Maybe I'm going to spend a little bit more money on an induction stove so that you're not paying to warm those coils up for 5 to 10 seconds before you put the pan on it. It's changing the conversation around where are you focusing your attention. And generally speaking, you start hitting this break point under 1,200 square feet. It starts going away up to 1,400 square feet. But certainly with ADUs, you're in this weird area of not thinking about making your house as efficient as possible the same way as you would about a traditional house. So this is kind of graphically demonstrating what I'm talking about. Small reaches this point of diminishing marginal returns a lot faster than a regular house. And this applies to everything that you're going to spend money on in building your ADU. Wall insulation, triple pane windows, the efficiency of your heat pump system, which washer and dryer are you going to buy? You're just going to be thinking about it a little bit differently. And I would say that this mentality around this hasn't fully taken off into the basically into the world of design and building, because there's not a lot of people focused on designing small, and not a lot of people that have run into these kinds of reports produced by, again, the independent HERS projectors. When we're thinking about energy use, we like to think about it on a per expected occupant basis, kind of like you do with septic. Septic is designed based on how many people are going to live in a house. Well, it matters a lot to think about that with your ADU as well. And one example is water heating. When you're comparing your 3 water heater types, a single person living in an ADU is going to use a lot less water and drain down a hot water tank faster than than a full family. And it's guaranteed that, like, when you look at tank heaters, they're generally more efficient than an instant electric, but that might not be the case with a single occupant. And this goes into picking appliances. How many light circuits do you put into it? There's a lot of pieces that go into it when you're thinking about a small space for one person. And I think the other key here is, if you are building new, and whether it's an addition or a new detached ADU, you do not need to bring gas or oil into the unit. It's completely unnecessary. And it pretty much costs the same to build an all-electric unit as it does to do a new gas-powered unit, after you account for bringing gas out there and the cost of a high-efficiency boiler. But a heat pump installed in mass, and these are the super efficient -14, -17 degree units. It's $10,000 to $14,000 installed. And that's about what it's going to cost you to put in a combi natural gas boiler. And I'm not going to, heat pumps are just they're the most efficient way to heat and cool a space, even in the coldest areas of Massachusetts and New England. That said, I will say it's not always the cheapest way to heat a space in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has seen a huge run up in electrical prices, and that has, unfortunately, made heat pumps slightly more expensive to heat a house than natural gas. But as we all know, that could shift overnight. Electrical rates could come down, natural gas could go back up. But at the end of the day, the heat pumps are generating more BTUs per unit of energy that they use over everything else. So they are way to the go. And if you can get to net zero with solar and be completely divorced from the fluctuations in electrical rates or natural gas rates. Before changing off this, if you are doing space conversion, that's a big one, because generally space conversion could be the cheaper way to get a new ADU in. You may use fossil fuels in that space conversion. If you have a big traditional gas boiler or oil boiler in your basement, it's going to be a lot cheaper to add a zone to that. And that is generally going to be allowed. You're looking at a couple $1,000s to extend a hot water baseboard circuit or add another zone, versus that 10 to 14. But of course, if you do that, you don't get air conditioning, which is becoming increasingly nice, especially after you've lived in a heat pump house. They're phenomenal. Last thing when building small. So part of the Mass Save requirements and now building code requirements is how airtight is your new building. And over here you can kind of see a range so you can understand these numbers. So air tightness is rated on a scale of I'm going to blank on what ACH is, but basically under pressure at 50 pascals, how much air is getting pushed through little micro holes, how much cubic feet of air is getting pushed through holes in your house. And you can kind of see over time, tightness has gotten better. You can see Energy Star is over here, 2.5. You can see Passive House is down here at 0.6. The interesting thing with air tightness is in order to figure out what your tightness is, it's dependent on how much air is leaving your house per cubic feet of volume of your house. So if you think about a big house and a small house, if you have a huge cubic feet of area, you can have more holes in your house and still have a low ACH number. When you get below 1,000 square feet, you get into a situation where your direct vented stove's hood vent, your exterior vented hood vent, can basically make you not qualify for code for your small house. And that's I say that because that's the scale that you're dealing with when you're worrying about air tightness. If you're going to build small, um, this one thing could actually make your house not code compliant. And it could be something silly like not a good damper on your hood vent on your stove. Or it could be you have a plumbing vent that didn't get sealed correctly. Like we're talking a hole the size of a quarter somewhere in your sill plate could throw this number off and turn you. And then if you close that, you could immediately be under 1 and in this net zero ready category. One thing that's kind of neat with this, there's this new technology. I would call it a technology, but it's a group called Aero Barrier. And essentially what they do is they put the house under pressure and they spray aerosolize latex in the air, mist latex. And while the house is basically on negative pressure, it pushes the latex through all of the little pinholes and it slowly increases the tightness of the house. And this is something that you would do in your house after you have drywall installed and after it's all taped and mudded and it seals off that drywall. It's something that you wouldn't want to do if you have after you've put in wood trim and things because it doesn't work for a very long period if you're doing it against wood trim. So you do it earlier on. There's other products to make this happen. CertainTeed makes a smart vapor barrier that you can wrap an ADU in. And that's a very effective, low risk way of doing it. So there's lots of ways to do this, but keep this in mind early in your process. It's something that is difficult to achieve as your house gets smaller. And it's important for the builder to keep that in mind, designer to keep that in mind. All right. Paul, what time were we shooting for 140 or one, just to pace myself through budget?
I think you have about 15 to 20 minutes, 15 minutes.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Well, I will wrap up kind of talking about budgets and what to expect. So just in general, construction costs are out of control. Nothing is cheap. Kol was right. ADUs are the cheapest way to build a new housing unit, but they're still not cheap, not like they used to be. And as an example, one of the first ADUs we built, summer 2019, we built it for 175,000. We can barely do it for 270 now. The costs have just skyrocketed. ADUs weren't exempt from it. Multifamily units aren't exempt for it. So it's just really expensive in general. So all of us need to be thinking about ways to pull budgets down. And it makes the onus on municipalities to think through new DPW requirements. Like, do we really want to add another $5,000 to the cost of a new housing unit? Is it really increasing the maintainability or making it easier for DPW or the life safety enough to justify that extra dollar? And that's where we're at in building ADUs and building of all things. It's like, do we have a justification for that extra dollar just because of how much costs went up over the pandemic and pandemic inflation? I said this, I'll say it again. ADUs are still less expensive than everything else. Whether it's a detached one or a space conversion or an addition, they are the cheapest housing unit to build, period. You can't beat it. And in like pure, like if you're starting a new space, it's a heck of a lot more expensive to get raw land to looking like a backyard. But if you're starting with a backyard, everything is more predictable. If you're attaching, everything is more predictable. There's no land cost. It's just so much cheaper and so much more predictable. So saving specifically, ADUs, there's no land cost. There's opportunities, like if it's a family ADU, they're going to come together and they're going to be pooling money on different services for the household. It's for the most part reusing infrastructure, unless DPWs are getting crazy and requiring other stuff. And there's way less site work costs. Or no site work costs if you're doing space conversions. So all of these are just significantly cheaper. And I put some numbers on here to give you an idea of where these numbers fall. Like if you're doing a new single family house and you want to put a driveway in, $5 to $8 a square foot. I mean, it's going to be just another big line item. If you can't reuse well and septic, you've got another big chunk of money, and this stuff just adds up very, very quickly, especially when you're dealing with a small budget to begin with. When you're targeting 150,000 or 250,000, each one of these is 10% of that budget. And you can just snowball that budget very, very fast. So similar to energy efficiency and ratings and small, budgets and small are different too. The cost of the home, so this is the vertical construction, the bit that you're going to have fun designing, the kitchen, the windows, it's only 40% of the cost of the project. So whether you build 700 or 800 square feet, that's not going to be the thing that throws your budget. It's the other things that are relatively fixed in a small project that don't get smaller that kind of create the base. And that's why we spent so much time talking about what are the deal breakers, because the deal breakers that increase the base level cost of building an ADU are the things that are going to throw your budget. So foundation and utility connections, on average, it's going to be about 30%. Site prep and landscaping, 15%. So this could be taking down your fence carefully so you can put it back up. This could be restoring gardens. This could be putting your lawn back together. If you're doing, we don't have as much experience doing space conversions, but there could be a big chunk of money just preparing a space with upgraded insulation or electrical to get there. Then planning, design, and permitting. This is going to be another 15% of the cost. So you could DIY all of this and basically just get an engineer to stamp your plans. But if you're going to bring in outside professionals to help you do the design work, help coordinate the survey, help deal with septic and all of those things, you're going to be looking at about 15% of the total project cost. Because so much of this is fixed and doesn't really move with the cost, we always say never proceed. Don't chase per square foot numbers when you're trying to evaluate who to build with, because they move so fast. And there's an example on the right here of our numbers, and you can see how different they are. Our 800 square foot ADU, we show the price of, we priced 275 to 300. That's 340 a square foot all in. All the things the same specs, all of the site work the same. You build it smaller, 500 square foot, it's now 490 a square foot. So when you're out there shopping, trying to figure out who's going to build this, the per square foot numbers for the whole project are basically irrelevant. So the key, if you are looking for square foot numbers, is you need to know what is the per square foot number above the foundation. And that is the number that theoretically you could start comparing apples to apples on if you have a list of interior specifications and different build specs. But ultimately, it's extremely difficult to compare prices in construction. I don't know if it's different on the West Coast, but I would say it's nearly impossible in Massachusetts, in Maine, and in New England. I'm not from I didn't come from construction coming into this, but I've been amazed how hard it is. It's extremely opaque, and I'm not entirely sure that the people who put the numbers together even know what their numbers include most of the time. So be careful when you're out there doing budgets. So kind of on that note, when you're out there trying to find somebody and you're trying to solicit quotes on plans, here's some red flags, and we've seen all of these. Handwritten quotes, you cannot do an ADU if it's on a handwritten quote. It's too complicated. So just go the other direction. It's got to be in a formal thing, and it has to look like it's actually got some thought into it, because these are complicated even if it's just converting a garage. Look for things like the foundation. Or if it specifically excludes the foundation, I would not recommend working with a builder if they are not going to take liability for the foundation and say you need to do that, or if they hold it as an allowance. It's just that's going to be kind of showing what the skill level is and what how the project's going to go. If it doesn't have a site plan or any detailed subcontractor specs, that means there's hand waving going on, and it's also not real. Site plans are key, some kind of sketch, because to estimate utilities, you need to know distances, you need to know grades. So if that doesn't exist, the hand wave price are just not going to be right. I said this before, relies on per square foot numbers. It's not real. It's not real in small homes. I think it becomes real over 2,000 square feet in some cases, or in multifamily. Doesn't have utility connections. As we know, that's the primary cost of the project. This applies to all types of ADUs. You're potentially going to have cheaper utility connections if you're doing space conversions, because you're going to have just one professional involved, but they're still going to be a big line item, and they're very likely going to cause other types of rework within the house. And then the last one, make sure they've reviewed the permitting requirements from the town. We've seen way too many surveyor or architect prepared plans that didn't meet zoning requirements that people paid real money for. People paid architects to design houses that they had design ADUs that they had surveys for that didn't meet setbacks in the town. So they spent money, and the plans were garbage and not usable. And then I put a budget here on the right, kind of an example of how we break our budgets down in terms of the level of detail. And ours are a little bit weird. This is not going to be exactly what you're looking for in a stick-built budget. It should be even more detailed than this. So at the very beginning, I made a comment that pretty much all new ADUs in Massachusetts are for family. And this is why. This is basically a typical rental profit and loss statement showing how much money somebody would make and the different ratios at different price points of the ADU. And the big one for a homeowner, if I spend $100,000 or go into debt, how much money am I going to get in cash per month? And you can kind of see as these build costs go up closer to the average, the actual cash flow just drops off a cliff. So you can think if a detached ADU is going to cost at least $250, homeowner is not about to finance that to make $300 a month. That said, someone who wants a convert space would potentially want to do that in order to make $7,700 a month. But it's difficult to get an ADU done these days for $150,000. I wouldn't say it's impossible. We've seen it done in Maine. There tends to be a pretty high DIY component, but it's very difficult to have that fully done by professionals. Other big things in here that generally kind of break apart payback periods, both on the cash that you invested, if you're going to do a mortgage with this, or if you're going to just look at just spending cash and when you get your money back. Again, they're not too bad at 150,000, but we're not really looking at that price to build an ADU. So the rental pro formas for building an ADU for a homeowner are very similar to trying to build multifamily housing at affordable rents. Developers are in a situation where they're looking for handouts to make their numbers work. Homeowners are in that same situation in order to make this work. The interesting thing, in 2019, this was absolutely not the case, and the original name of backyard ADUs was backyard rentals. And that was our name for 2 years until we built 10 family ADUs and realized that nobody wanted to build ADUs as rentals, even when the numbers made so much sense to do so. We were looking at basically people were able to get like a 15 to 20 cap rate, and their cash on cash yields were just off the charts. They were getting their full money back in like 2 years for doing an affordable ADU. But that was back when we were building these for less than 200 and interest rates were 3.5%. But that time is gone, at least for now. And again, you can look rents, you can adjust these up or down. But as rents go higher, costs generally get more, like in the closer areas of Boston. And then finally, I don't want to end with any thought that ADUs are not cheaper to build, but ADUs are the cheapest thing to build, period. Space conversions can be done the cheapest. They're not always going to be the cheapest because they can get complicated in a hurry. 80 detached ADUs are next. I'd say detached ADUs, I said this in the beginning, we do detached ADUs because they are the easiest to plan in a scalable way. It's very easy for us to look at a backyard and figure out how much it's going to cost pretty quickly. New single family homes, it's basically the cost of an ADU that's slightly bigger, plus utilities and plus land acquisition. And then I still don't know if I fully believe this number for new apartments, but there was a Boston Globe article a while back that said the average new apartment, one bedroom apartment, costs $600,000 in greater Boston to build, with entitlements, land costs, and all of that stuff. We've independently heard that 2 or 3 times now from nonprofit developers, so it must be true. It's not quite this high in Maine. In Maine, it's closer to 300 to 400,000 per unit. But Massachusetts is significantly more difficult to work in than Maine is. So a lot of that is regulatory burden, which we've been kind of going on about. But anyway, I'll kind of start wrapping this up. But ADUs are the cheapest to build, and it's in order to spur housing for the best bang for our buck. This is the way to do it. And I think we can get there in Massachusetts. It's an exciting time, and we'd love to be a part of it. So, oh, that's the sales side. Go get a feasibility study, but I'll hand it back to you, Cole.
No, I mean, people should go get a feasibility study. I think that's clearly like a good first step. And you know, this was not a raw presentation, largely because of all these cautionary matters that you presented. But I think that's kind of what I was interested in imparting here to the people on the call, that this is really complicated. In California, they've passed 10 ADU bills to deal with all the kind of cleanup of their initial attempts to pass solid ADU laws. And I wouldn't doubt that if Massachusetts is taking this stuff seriously and actually wants to meet their 10,000 ADU goal, then they will also have to pass a series of bills that supersede a lot of these issues that you raised, which were really informative. So thank you for imparting all of this information for people on the call. Just to a couple points I'll make and ask about are when we have statewide preemptive laws such as what has passed in Massachusetts, that doesn't mean that jurisdictions are going to update their website to reflect the new rules, unfortunately. They're not going to be thrown in jail if they don't update their website, but those rules are not enforceable. So that is to say, if the municipality still says on their website you have to owner occupy your ADU, how would you recommend a citizen who is building an ADU deal with that? So that's a first practical question I'll pose to you, Chris.
So what is happening right now is the towns are basically approving ADUs per the state law until they update their zoning bylaws. And we've been Bellrica, North Attleboro, Pepperell. We're seeing that more and more. So I think you're just asking the building commissioner or asking the planning department if they're going to honor this state law until they update the zoning bylaw, and then just push forward with your application based on the state law.
And as an advocacy matter, it's problematic when jurisdictions have incorrect information, because then the citizens in that jurisdiction aren't aware of what they're entitled to do. So I think that's kind of the role of the people on this call. As you all are here, you're set aside a couple hours to learn this information, or you're getting more detail about these standards and what these new rules allow. Part of what we do as an organization at ADUspecialists.org is do education for practitioners, real estate professionals, designers, builders, lenders, appraisers, building commissioners, appraisers, a whole bunch of different folks, so that you all are able to kind of bring to bear the information that you have to assist homeowners, to allow them to actually proceed with a project that they didn't know that they could do. I think there's going to be a great awareness of ADUs as a term that will spread in the next few years, but I think the reality of actually getting to do these projects is going to be hindered greatly by both the some of the things that are not addressed directly by the state law, such as setback requirements, but also all these other jurisdictional issues, such as conservation overlays and septic and dedicated sewer connections that Chris covered. So I think there's still a good amount of advocacy that needs to occur to actually get the dynamics for people who want to build ADUs to be favorable to build them. All right, so I think maybe Kelsey, why don't I ask you to read some of the questions in the Q&A for Chris and me, and any other questions that you've kind of come across that you think are worth raising.
Yeah, for sure. So first, just really quick, thank you for those of you who put some questions in the Q&A. I see the couple that are more comments than questions, so I'll read them out loud, but they're maybe not necessarily an answer to be had, but more of a comment to make. I did see that there was one from Donna Kincaid. If you can, I think you said something about 50%, sorry, where did it go? 50% of living space or total floor space. If you can just put that in the context that you were asking the questions in the Q&A, Donna, or I'm sorry, Donna Edwards. If you can put that in the context that you're hoping to have an answer in the Q&A, that would be great. And then that way we can answer that in the context. That would be awesome. Yeah. And actually, you know what? Go ahead, Ron Morgan. If you want to just go ahead and ask your question, just go for it.
Okay. So the law states that if you got 900 square feet of an ADU, so that means you have 1,800 square feet or more of a house that you could utilize to meet that 900 square feet. My question is, they allow 900 square feet, including the basement of, I think it's habitable space. Does that equate the same in an ADU? Like if you put a basement in an ADU and you have 900 square feet above, can you use the basement for storage, or are they going to be required to use that as part of the actual square footage of living space? If that makes sense.
Yeah. Ron, the state law specifically defines gross floor area, and it also specifically includes basements in that calculation, which is a little bit weird because that wouldn't typically be in there. So when they're figuring out what the proportionality is, technically speaking, the basement's included, which is a little bit odd. And technically speaking, I think if someone takes a literal interpretation, the basement of the ADU may be included in that proportionality as well. That said, I don't expect municipalities to enforce it that way because historically, uh, the way that they calculate the living area and the proportionality is just weird and all over the place. Um, I don't want to, we're going to be actually testing this on a project coming up. I'm not going to mention where it is because there's a certain way that we'd like it to go. But we will know in the next couple of months how A Town will take it.
Excellent. Excellent.
I'll just Chris, maybe you can just respond to this observation, but generally speaking, if there's an interior connection from the ADU to an additional portion of accessory space that isn't technically part of the ADU, if you have an interior doorway connection, it is going to be part of the ADU from a floor square footage point of view. But if only has exterior access, that is to say, if you build an ADU with a 900 square foot basement, but there's only an exterior access to that basement would not be classified as square footage counted toward the ADU. Does that correlate to anything you've experienced in Mass?
I think it's going to be so town to town. I mean, we've had towns that exclude closets from their calculation, and then they've got some weird. I mean, it's overruled now, but the town of Falmouth had this insane way of calculating how big the existing house was for purposes of the ADU, and it took we got three different answers from three different people in the municipality, all in writing, and all had different max ADU sizes. And I think that's going to apply to the interpretation of the state law. And it will kind of be on the onus of the builder and designer and homeowner to get what they need from it. And I think it will provide opportunities for ambiguity and possibly the favor of the project, depending on the town. Definitely depending on the town.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I
Jack,
did one more thing. Excuse me. I did reach out to Catherine Neal, who works with the state on this whole process with that same question. So if I do get an answer, I can get back to you on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you may need to do it. I think Catherine's leaving the ADU team. I don't know who's going to backfill her, but if you haven't heard back, it might be why.
Okay.
the next question I'm going to go to is Jackie Penta. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question about the detached units in Boston?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. The first one was whether you've done this in the city of Boston. I did go into the building department and they told me that you're currently not allowed to build detached units. So I'm just curious if you had any feedback there.
We haven't done it in Boston yet, but they do need to update their zoning bylaw, and theoretically you should be able to do it now. They had until February to do those updates.
Was Boston subject to the Affordable Care Act, or were they exempted from it?
Is that a stumper? It's odd, but I don't want to say hard if you heard something different.
I feel like maybe somebody else can chime in. I feel like they were uniquely exempted from it, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I won't say hard one way or the other on that because I haven't heard that before, but it sounds like a weird thing to make up.
Yeah.
Jackie, did you have another question you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, and then the second question was just if you start a project, is there a risk that the municipality could add legislation that makes it so that you can't finish your project, or once it's approved, are you grandfathered in at that point since the laws are still changing?
Yeah, once a project's permitted, it's permitted. So you can't have in hindsight, so you do get grandfathered in. And our director of pre-construction actually just chimed in on Boston, and they are beating by their own drum. So they're going their own route. I don't know the specifics on what they've done with detached, but I guess I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere so dense like that has got a reason for not wanting detached ADUs. And I've not seen a lot I would think it's hard to find a space for a detached ADU in Boston. We did do detached multiple use structure in Somerville, and that was a challenge. That was a challenge to make that fit.
Okay, great, thank you.
I'm just going to go over here really quick to a question that was asked during the presentation by Deb Carey. Deb, do you want to come in and ask your question about the existing septic system? Okay, I'm going to take it that Deb's not with us. She might have dropped off. So just in, we'll skip that one. Just let's see. Donna, do you want to come in and ask your question about the ADU above the garage?
Okay, so I was looking to build a garage, and then this ADU came up. One of my neighbors said, you should put an apartment on top. And so I was just wondering how the square footage, again, is calculated in that situation. Does the garage count towards the ADU square footage or not, or?
No, I think that's a pretty easy one to say would not. The garage wouldn't be counted.
Okay, all right. And then the house that I was putting it in has it's a 2-bedroom house, but it has a 3-bedroom septic.
Okay.
So that's what we said, that we should be able to tie, if we did a 1-bedroom ADU, it should tie to that septic.
You should be allowed to do that. You may
Okay.
run into requirements to upgrade your septic tank. Some municipalities are interpreting Title V in a draconian way, and that adding the ADU is a change of use to some degree, and then they're requiring the system to come up to code. And most old septic systems have single chamber septic tanks.
Well, this septic system's only 3 years old.
Oh, then you'll be fine then. You should be able to just tie right into it. Yep.
Okay.
And I'll just make a general point regarding the flexibility of different structural forms that you can build ADUs. Generally speaking, with this kind of law, you should be able to build both an ADU and attach it to other uses, such as like an ADU behind a workshop or above a garage, or an ADU even in conjunction with like an accessory space that could be used as an office for the primary house. And as the homeowner, you can do whatever you want with these different spaces. So it gives you a lot of like kind of flexibility to use that space creatively in different ways over the decades of time that you reside on the property.
Okay, well, it's literally a rental property next door. It had a garage. We had to take down the garage, and we're going to put up a new garage because I use the garage for, the kids' cars.
And
And
you'll
so,
probably need to do that. You'll probably need to put it down, tear it down, and put a new foundation in that's frost protected. But I would check on your replacement of non-conforming structure requirements if you are with back before you tear anything down to make sure you can put it back up.
okay.
And let's also, Chris, just talk briefly about that kind of situation. So, whereas a garage doesn't have any second floor live load, an ADU on top of the garage would, that would presumably change the foundation requirements as well as maybe like the structural requirements for engineering that kind of building. Can you speak to that a little bit? And the cost implications of that, just as a structural matter?
Yep, absolutely. There's two parts of evaluating a garage. One is the foundation frost protected. And the second one is it on a footing that can accommodate the load of a dwelling unit? In most situations in New England, the answer is no to both of those for an old garage, especially if it's under 400 square feet. So you're in a situation where you are basically tearing that garage down and starting from scratch and just reusing the footprint. And it even applies, it wouldn't even be just adding a second story. More often than not, you're not going to be able to convert that garage that's not on a frost protected footing. You'd have to lift it up and redo the foundation underneath it. But for that uninsulated non-residential structure that's under 400 square feet, it doesn't need that frost protected footing. It can be on a 4-inch slab. And that's one of the bad things about garage conversions in New England is a lot of our garages are not there, whereas a lot of them out west can be converted and have more usable. They don't have to dig the whole thing up to make it work. But on the non-conforming front, the other thing about our garages is a lot of them are non-conforming, sitting inside of a required setback. And every town's going to have a slightly different approach to allowing you to either need it. Some towns will be as crazy as, no, you can't take the whole thing down. Leave that wall there so I can check my box. Some of them are going to let you fully tear it down and put it back up in the spot a surveyor said it was. Some towns are even going to allow you to expand that structure. It's pretty common to see that you can add a half story to a non-conforming garage if it's housing an ADU. Some towns say if you're already in the setback, you can extend the non-conformance all the way into the rear yard too. So it'll be important to check that out. Every town's a bit different, and it will definitely have implications for a lot of ADU garage projects.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to go to Laura Champa. Laura, do you want to ask your questions about fire and egress codes in conversions, if you're still here?
Sure, I'm still here. Thank you,
Great.
guys. It was great. Given that a lot of these are being do-it-yourselfers and for family members, especially elderly, I'm assuming, how are the safety issues around fire and egress codes and other safety issues being handled? And, you know, do you need municipal sign-off for a lot of these? Like, do you have to get things approved just like everything else, or is there another mechanism?
Yeah, there's no shortcuts when it comes to life safety or fire protection for ADUs of any kind. And I would divide kind of the concerns into two buckets. You've got your space conversion bucket and you've got your new detached ADU bucket. The new detached ADU bucket is pretty easy. It's very clear what's required from a building code standpoint for egress with windows and doors and arc fault breakers and all of the things that make a new structure extremely unlikely to be part of a fatal fire. I would say, luckily, Massachusetts has not jumped on the sprinkler bandwagon for new single-family homes. Unfortunately, Maine has. New Hampshire passed a law that bans sprinklers in 1 and 2 family homes, and Maine hopefully is going to do the same thing this year. And I say that out of detailed research into the subject, not out of a not caring for life safety. Going to space conversion, it's a totally different story. A lot of the structures in New England are balloon framed. They're older. They may or may not have working fire detectors. They may have old electrical systems. And there's going to be a lot of onus put on that project in order to make sure that it does have appropriate egress if you're on a 3rd floor. You are potentially going to have to add stairwells, which might conflict with zoning code. You are going to have to upgrade windows. You're probably going to need to upgrade all of your smoke detection systems and make sure they're all hardwired. And it will go through basically, it's going to be on the architect and the engineer to make sure all those codes are followed in your building plans. And then the building commissioner, in partnership with the fire chief, is going to review that and make sure it's in compliance. So it will be definitely going to be protected in this process if any of these get built. And the DIY scenario that you mentioned, they are not going to be exempt from this either. That's potentially a risk in rural Maine or in Vermont or areas that don't have the stringent regulations that Massachusetts have. But it would be very difficult for somebody to pull a fast one in Massachusetts. So I think there's a lot of protections in place.
Thank you.
Just really quick, and I'll assume that it's kind of city by city, but how will the post office handle ADUs? Are they getting a separate address?
Yeah, they get a separate.
Okay.
Yeah, it's usually 1A and 1B.
Great. And then Sonia, do you want to come in and ask your question about tax benefits or any rebates that you're seeing?
Okay, well, I live in a very small community and everybody's really backwards here. And the CEO is, well, dirty. Because I've already been into court with them over my vintage campers brought to my property. And but my community that I've been here for 7 years, I've noticed this community, we're losing our seniors because our taxes are so high that seniors can't afford to live here. So they're falling behind in their house payments, and then they're being forced out of their homes. So this community is literally imploding. And so I'm looking at like how can I get involved on the local political arena of approaching the politicians to say we need to start thinking about ADUs. We don't have enough senior housing available for the boom and what's going on in people's care. And how do we create, incentives to, how do we bring about, ADUs to our area where, um, like keeping seniors in our community, one. Two, how do we get our local jurisdictions, our municipalities to embrace keeping them here? Like, how do we bring money, keeping the money into our communities by adding the ADUs, like a tax benefit? So it's that, how do we have that conversation of creating a more holistic approach towards solutions versus having a small-mindedness towards this, because that is exactly here. There's a lot of small-mindedness here. So many people are fixed in their ways. And I know I'm throwing out a lot of things here. And Kol, by the way, we spoke many years ago when I visited in Oregon. That's how I met you, by phone. So I'm glad to be, I've been following you here. But I see the ADUs as the future of communities when it comes to the crisis of people having financial issues, creating a second income, implement the income if they need, but more importantly, caring for family when there's not enough available for that. But how do we tie our communities in? That it's that conversation of, um, you know, could this then the windfall, the good catch of this creates a tax benefit to the community when you have another person living on a property in a situation like this? That's one of the questions I have. How do I create this conversation? What kind of script do you have? I'm more in that place of wanting to obviously be the advocate. I got a law passed in my state of Maryland when I was a victim, and I went to court over somebody after the neighborhood going after over my vintage campers because they were so snotty about it. Put them in their place, and so I came across how small-minded it is here, and I'm going, I see the need for this. I see, we all see this future need for this. And New York, I'm sure you already know about it, but New York is very hostile about Airbnb.
Sonia,
Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we only have 2 minutes left. So do you have a specific question that we can address, please?
It's the script. It's the tax script for communities. It's that advocacy thing. It's that whole thing. So what do we have? It's a lot. Got a lot of questions, but yeah, those two.
Well, I mean, I'll say that there's a lot that goes into getting ADUs to actually take hold. And this first piece of legislation is really important. If nothing else, it'll spur conversation like this, where we find the 10 other huge obstructions to actually building ADUs. And then even when you get all of those obstructions cleared, it's still really expensive to build ADUs no matter what, relative to not building ADUs. I mean, any housing form is expensive at this point because of the cost of construction, cost of labor, cost of materials. And it's a challenge. And then we have to bring financing to bear. And so getting lenders on board. All this is to say this is like a part of a larger continuum of things that need to occur to build housing, and we need housing, and there has to be this is the pathway forward to creating more affordable infill housing. It's not going to be easy. So I think education and coming to offerings that we have where you can kind of collaborate with builders and designers and lenders. And on that note, I'm going to just briefly take a second here to promote an upcoming event that we have. We're going to be doing a event called ADU Academy, which is kind of like this course, but a day long, and it's going to be in Denver, Colorado. It's taught by designers, builders,
Cool. Sorry.
realtors, and yeah.
Can you just switch your tab? You're on the you're on building ADU or accessorydwelling.org right now.
Yep.
There we go.
All right. So this is this 1 day long event that we're having that's going to be in Denver on June 13th. And I would encourage people, we're really trying to get people from Colorado, Montana, Arizona, Massachusetts, and Washington to come. Practitioners who want to learn in great depth about all these different things, to collaborate and learn from their peers, so that you can kind of help both homeowners to build ADUs, but also kind of become a more informed advocate on what the obstructions to development are, whether it's septic and how to strategies to deal with septic systems, or whether it's the fact that it's difficult to convert garages and have them meet the energy code, because they're requiring that you meet new construction standards, and that makes garage conversions almost impossible to do. So there's a lot to learn there, and Chris kind of has done a masterful job at illustrating all the complexities for site development. But his product at least takes care of the box portion and making that simple, but all these other variables of site development can be quite complicated. So that was a long-winded answer to a long-winded question. Chris, do you have any other insights you want to offer?
Yeah, you got to show up at the town when hearings are occurring, and lead the discussion, so it's not just the naysayers, because all of the town stuff typically is the loud minority rather than the majority that really wants this stuff.
I have been thinking about approaching the town just to say, this is going to become a more and more growing issue everywhere.
Mhm.
Can we be in front of this? Can we be a leader of this? Like, how do we become the example of? Yeah, it's about planting the seed, as you're talking about. I've thought about it. Then I also don't like, yeah.
It's 11:02, so I'm going to call it. Thank you all very much for attending today, and I will be reaching out via email after this class later today. But again, just a huge thank you to Chris for your presentation today and for being the subject matter expert here in Massachusetts. And then also thank you to you, Kol, for your insight and your expertise. And yeah, Kate and I'll send out an announcement about post-class, and also just keep an eye out on any of our other trainings that can apply to you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Everybody.
you.
Thank you. It was awesome.